I like the opening your eyes analogy. I feel like that has a lot of potential, and obviously, I feel like it's it's a familiar concept. I'm wondering how to more specifically tie it to this term subtle energy. Just the whole idea of what are you registering and what are you not. That there's just it's like an ever-present potential. That like the subtle realm is constantly present, and it's a doorway to registering things that you have either shut out or never consciously made contact with.
Yes.
I would say initially, how I've felt it is as a state change. That it's like when you first feel that potential or that organ of perception of the subtle realm or of subtle energy, it's like a buzz. That if you the buzz could just be noticing it for the first time. If you notice the emotional charge of a conversation, and by notice it, I mean being outside of it enough to see that the conversation is generating this new feeling that prior to noticing it, you would feel like it's just your reaction to it. But noticing that it's something that's co-created by the two people in the conversation, like that's to me a state change that reveals the subtle realm.
Yes, no doubt. Again, I think that's well put, and that gets in. That certainly plays out in the field of psychotherapy. This is the idea of transference. I'll go on about it in a later podcast, but
For the rest of my life, I'll go on about it
yeah.
for the rest of my life.
Currently, psychotherapy is not really taking that into account anymore. But the idea of transference, and like you said, that it's confusing, and there's a co-creation, and so relational psychotherapy is all about that. It's recognizing that and working with that, and so yeah, it's a game changer as far as getting it caused, just like you said.
But also make you feel nuts, like there's a third person in the conversation.
No doubt, and in psychotherapy, there's a term called the analytic third, and that's it's just part and parcel of the theory that you have the analyst, the analysand, and the analytic third.
I'm really serving up these transitions on a silver platter. I'm pretty impressed.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I think for me, I just brought it up as another way to think about the subtle realm, because I feel like the experiences you had led to a potential to see a lot of different dimensions in someone's experience and in a client. And as after seeing them in yourself, is that fair? Would you say that you saw all these things in yourself before you started to see them in other people?
It was both. I've learned just an enormous amount in session. Stuff just starts happening in session, and like you said, it's this co-creation, and so I'm learning and changing as I'm working with someone, and so insights come in both cases, whether I'm alone working, so to speak, on myself or working on a client. Working with is a more accurate term. Working with myself or with a client. It's another whole topic that I really want to dive into. But this idea of of relational, the dimension approach is a relational approach, and how relationship is what it comes down to. And it's another one of these things where I want to talk about how in the same way that on a spiritual level, for example, in Christianity, this idea of a relationship with Christ. It's like, what the hell does that mean? What's the significance of that? Why is that important? What is that symbolically? And in the same way that you can arrive at this relationship experience, which creates an experience of a third, or like the idea of it in the Holy Trinity, the Holy Spirit is the third, it's the presence that shows up when you have a relationship between the other two parts. So when you and another person are interacting, and then there's this like third thing The third thing is it has life to it. It has presence. Without that, you have a disconnect, right? You have just two people sort of banging into each other, or not connecting, or whatever. But when you actually get communication, when you actually get connection, when you actually get relationship, this third thing shows up, and that third thing is consciousness, is presence, is depth and richness in life, and it's what is sustaining to us, and we suffer terribly the absence of that, and the understanding that relationship is the all-important thing. And then it trickles all the way down to, again, if I go back to the ankle thing, it's about your relationship with your ankle, which just sounds corny. But it's that if your consciousness and your ankle get in touch, there's this experience that happens that is an embodiment, that is an aliveness, that is the opposite of suffering.
I like the parallel structure of the description, that the three could be you, your toe, and consciousness, or you and another person in consciousness. And I think, to me, I think about it as like steps of understanding, and that for some people it may, I think for me, the things I learn about myself are the things I'm able to relate to other people about. And so the work that I do on myself, hopefully, is the potential for improved relationships with other people.
And when I talk about a relationship with yourself, does that?
Yeah, I think that lines up. I mean, I think that part of like a subtle, I feel like it's tied into subtle energy. It's just the developing the awareness that there's more than one of you. there's many me's vying for the driver's seat, and to be consciousness is the awareness outside of that, or outside of the automated cycling through programs.
Yeah, totally. So
totally, there's a totally unapproachable sequence of words.
I think you're articulating it well. This is that thing where, it feels really good to me to be in this flow. I feel you tracking me. Obviously, I'm jumping all over the place. Certainly jumping all over with regard to consciousness work, imaginal, subtle, mental, emotional, physical. And I appreciate this thing where you keep trying to bring it back to that sequence. And do you feel like it's, is it working that I'm kind of,
we're kind of jumping into territory that isn't solely descriptive. It isn't solely factual, and it's very deeply experiential. Was there a client that you worked with kind of before and after these changes started to happen? Like, did anybody stick with you as a client through all that?
Yeah, no doubt. There were clients that I've actually got a handful of clients that I saw in the first year that I started practicing here in Minneapolis, which was in '96. That I still see, and they'll tell you, like, I've been with Lance through the various, through evolutions. He used to torture me on the table with his elbow, and then, he used to frustrate me by just looking at me laying on the table and not touching me at all, and then we moved more into doing mental emotional stuff and whatever, but. And I really, there's a really deep relationship and a deep appreciation I have for them for sticking with me. And so there's a lot of cool stories like that where I've seen the same client through these various fluctuations in how I work.
What's the feedback you got from them? So obviously there was like there was pain, and then there was bewilderment, and then there was crying. Like, what? What's there's obviously the feedback of sticking with it. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
That someone would go through all that with you.
They were all, deeply masochistic, obviously.
Right. No, just kidding. Just as a masochistic person. That's what
Right.
I'm gonna edit that out. And obviously, like you said, that your business has been sustained by referrals. So the people that have stuck with it liked it, or the people that, worked with you appreciated the outcome. With regards to the subtle realm or subtle energy, is there client feedback around experiencing that or becoming aware of that for themselves? Because what we've talked about earlier and what we continue to try to emphasize is that this organ of perception is already there in everyone, and that your connection to it facilitates it for other people. But is there positive growth in that awareness in clients?
Like, are you asking, is it just symptom change that happens in the client, or is it, or does their...
Do they wake up?
Well, see that, yes, but it depends, and that's why.
For sure. It's not like either or, and it's not like there's a right or wrong, and it's not like there's a necessary change. But this thing we're talking about as a potential, as a it's a universal constant. This awareness, is that something that, as people have worked with you, you've seen changes in that, in addition to changes in their symptoms and underlying cause for whatever the presenting issue or challenge was that they came to you with?
Yes, definitely, and that's where, at a certain point, I started doing work that it became obvious to me was about awakening. It was, and so I use the term consciousness work. And the consciousness work piece is, I'm doing the dimension approach, which is facilitating, them being conscious of something. Body work is, I'm facilitating them becoming conscious of areas of their body that they weren't. Subtle energy work, I'm helping them become conscious of aspects of their subtle energy field that they weren't. When you get to consciousness work, I'm helping them become conscious of their own consciousness, which is awakening. Some clients come in and they specifically want that. They're coming in because they are interested in awakening, interested in consciousness studies, interested in enlightenment, spiritual experiences, etc. And so they're wanting, those kinds of changes. And so the focus then is about holding and reflecting their consciousness to them in a particular way into particular energy centers that then result in actualization and realization of, for example, the conscious mind. That said, no matter what the focus of the sessions are, even if a person comes in and they just want their ankle to feel better, the work I'm doing does facilitate awakening, even if the focus is on their ankle. It's just that we're not going after that as directly. So there are ways that I could go about it that would be kind of more effective towards awakening, but there's always kind of that effect to some degree.
That makes sense. That there's also just the aspect of consciousness work that, to some degree, you're probably looking for it. I think I'm asking about, in relation to subtle energy, to me it feels like a entry point to that kind of consciousness work, that you might notice something in the subtle field, in the below the surface of the gross characteristics, the physical characteristics, that we begin to notice things in the subtle realm before we are even aware of consciousness or consciousness work or attempts to foster that. There's something to describe that we haven't described yet about noticing subtle energy.
So I was talking about registering, and my point there is everyone's experiencing and responding to subtle energy on a regular basis. It's just that they aren't typically registering it as such. We interpret data, physical data, emotional data, subtle energetic data, mental data. We interpret it, right? And we form language in order to have a cognitive understanding of it. And then that cognitive understanding is what we generally call life. And again, we do it to a ridiculous degree, right? We're just enslaved and entrapped by our cognitive interpretations of experience that we have. So, and this as with all these topics, it's like, well, I could take off on a tangent here and say the basis of awakening, the basis of alienation from nature or from God. Is that instead of having direct experience, even just of our body, our attention stays focused on and identified with, and even excludes most information except the cognitive. And so we literally live by these ideas, these cognitive interpretations. This is what Jacques Lacan's work is about in psychotherapy, where he says that the unconscious is structured, and it's structured as a language, and that the language that we speak, not just the outward language of a society, but your own internal language that you've created, you live by it as though it was real or true. And subtle energetic experience is not a cognitive experience. And so most people aren't letting subtle energetic experience register as such, because it's going to register in a way that isn't a thought. If you're feeling the breeze, if we're standing outside and I say, is it dead still out here right now, or do you feel a breeze? Or maybe it's, maybe the wind's going 20 miles an hour. The way you're going to figure that out, or one of the ways that you could figure it out is you're going to pay attention to the sensory data in your body, right? Do you feel the breeze? And then you're going to cognitively interpret that and then say, yes, there's a breeze. But the thought about there being a breeze is different than the actual physical sensation of it, right? And with a breeze, it's invisible, right? We don't see it with our eyes. It's this invisible thing that you're feeling. And of course, if someone wasn't able to feel that breeze or couldn't register like that, they'd say, what are you talking about? You'd say, well, I feel this, I feel this breeze. And it's like, well, if you say that a breeze, if you say that air molecules are analogous to subtle energy, for example, and someone who again is kind of not registering that kind of experience, they'd say, what are you talking about? And you'd say, well, I feel, these air molecules, they're like moving in space, and so they're running into my face, and I feel them hit my face, and so then I know there's a breeze. And it's like, you'd just sound insane, or an analogy I use a lot is, if you look at a tree and you see the tree is moving and the leaves are fluttering, and you could make the interpretation that tree is deciding to flutter its leaves, but you make a consciousness shift to where you become aware of wind, and then you see it different. The tree isn't deciding to do that. The wind is moving the tree. And then another dimensional shift is that you would come to recognize, the air molecules aren't deciding to rush over here and then rush over there. It's changes in pressure that the air molecules are simply being pushed around by. Oh, okay, so then the Earth's deciding to have more pressure here or more pressure there. No, that's actually not true either. The main thing that's causing pressure change is activity that's going on the sun. Right? And at that point, it's like, well,
now I'm going to take a nap.
Now, right.
That's too much to consider.
Right.
I love that analogy, this analogy for the tree, because I thought there were a couple different words that you used were really good, and then also the challenge of words in general for all of this. And I think that that analogy gets at it. So if you're feeling the breeze, it's a great way to describe that initially that subtle energy is a feeling long before you have words for it.
Yes.
And I thought that was really well said. And the challenge of language is that we're working to describe something that is, for many people up to this point, indescribable. And because it's indescribable, it may seem inconsequential. And that was the other thing I thought about with feeling the breeze, that feeling subtle energy could be dismissed.
Yeah.
And if we can't describe it, we feel like it may not be important. And what I think the value of talking about it is bringing our awareness to something that so far we may have dismissed. And it gets at a lot of different things as far as how we function. But I like that it's in what you're talking about and feeling the breeze, that in a conversation between two people, one person could feel the breeze and one could not. And it may be because where they're standing, it may be because uh, they don't have skin. No, like it could be for a lot of different reasons, but that feeling the breeze and acknowledging you feel the breeze can be maybe a personal experience before it's validated by someone else.
Wow.
And the underlying cause of that breeze is a whole other discussion, but noticing, and just it's a really good metaphor, so I think we should come back to it in other podcasts, but it's a good analogy for this breeze could be so strong it's like push us in a direction that we didn't know we were going. Not to spin out on it, but the it starts to get at our motivations and our intentions and our actions and how they're influenced by our feelings that we may not be recognizing. If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com.